if you gather all of the names of the individuals who are explicitly stated to be prophets and messengers, you will come up with a list of less than 100 individuals. This is a great difference in number between that and the 124,000 prophets and messengers that were sent allegedly to mankind by the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. And so we're going to go on a search to try to find out, did God send these messengers? And if we assume that he did, where is the evidence of them? What happened to them? Why are they not evident? Why did history forget about these individuals, these prophets and messengers? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد إليهم والمهدين وسلم تسليما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear brother and companion Amir.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, beloved father.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor.
The honor is all mine. Amir, I want to talk to you about this important topic today, and that is the topic of the prophets and the messengers. We have a narration from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and it states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent forward to the earth 124,000 prophets and messengers. 124,000 prophets and messengers from the time of Adam alayhi salam all the way to the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We also have this notion and these verses in the Holy Quran that state that God had sent these messengers to all of the nations of the earth, or most of them. The only exception would be a nation that God knows has no goodness in them. That God knows that even if they heard the message of the messenger, that they would disbelieve in it. And this is stated in the verse in the Holy Quran where it says that if God would have known that in them is any goodness, he would have made them hear it. All right? And this was in response to people that would ask, what about, individuals that die and never heard the message? These individuals that died and never heard the message, it's because God actually did not make them hear the message, because making them hear the message would have been pointless. Why? Because if God knew that these individuals had any goodness in them, he would have caused their path to cross paths with somebody who is a messenger from God, or somebody who would enlighten them to the truth or to the message of the messenger. So we have this golden rule that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to everybody a messenger if they have even the potential to believe. Anybody who has any goodness in them must hear at some point the message. And since most of the nations on the earth, are made up of good people and bad people, that means that God would have sent to most of the nations on the earth a messenger or a series of messengers, a series of prophets. The Holy Quran also states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not bring down a punishment upon a people unless he sent a messenger to them first. And this same concept, this same notion exists also within Judaism and Christianity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not bring down the punishment upon a nation until he sends them first a warning, or somebody who bears for them, a command from God that they choose to reject and disobey. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, cannot put people into eternal hellfire or bring down a punishment like he brought down upon Sodom and Gomorrah without first sending to them Lot. He can't punish the nation of Muhammad without first sending to them Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He can't exile the Jews, right, and cause them to be captured, right, and exiled by Nebuchadnezzar unless he first sends to them Jeremiah. Or he cannot exile the Jews by the Romans, right, before first sending to them the Messiah, son of Mary, and them rejecting. Okay?
Yes.
Good. When we look into Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we'll find that the three religions, they essentially believe in almost all of the same prophets and messengers. You have the Jews believing in all of the characters from Adam all the way down to the prophet that they consider to be their final messenger that came to them, which was Malachi. You find Christianity affirming and confirming that all of those individuals were at least sacred individuals with them.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
But they add on them a few more. Like, for example, they consider that Zechariah was a prophet.
Yes.
They consider that a couple women were prophets, or at least reached to the rank of prophethood after Malachi, right? One of them being Mother Mary, who Gabriel appears to her. Other than her is a woman by the name of Anne in some traditions, Hannah, and others. And they consider also, Christians consider, so they consider that Zechariah was a prophet, but they also consider that John the Baptist was a prophet. And not just any prophet, but they consider John to have been the greatest prophet that ever lived. And that's why he was the prophet or the messenger that came directly before Jesus Christ. And you find the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in similar fashion in the religion of Islam coming and confirming all of the initial prophets that the Jews had come with, as well as the ones that the Christians have affirmed as prophets and messengers. The Muslims also believe in John the Baptist and Zechariah, etc. But adding also another prophet, and that was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in addition to other proofs of God or vicegerents or caliphs or divinely appointed characters who come after the Prophet Muhammad as his successors, and those are the Imams and the Mahdis alayhim salam. But if you gather all of these individuals from these Abrahamic religions, the three of them, if you gather all of the names of the individuals who are explicitly stated to be prophets and messengers, from the three of them combined, the three religions combined, you will come up with a list of less than 100 individuals. And this is a great difference, right, in number between that and the 124,000 prophets and messengers that were sent allegedly to mankind by the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. And so we're going to go on a search to try to find out, did God send these messengers? And if we assume that he did, where is the evidence of them? What happened to them? Why are they not evident? Why did history forget about these individuals, these prophets and messengers?
Yes.
I think that one of the reasons why history forgot about these prophets and messengers was because of the rejection of the people to them, like the people rejecting these prophets and messengers, the nations that these messengers were sent to, saying, I don't believe that this individual is a prophet and messenger. And so eventually, throughout time, these names got erased and got forgotten. And we have examples of that. We have Zechariah and John, for example. They were sent to the Jews. And the Jews, even though now the Christians, a new religion, recognizes them, right? For the Jews that they were sent to, their own people said, these guys don't belong to us. They're not real prophets and messengers, and so they weren't counted on the list. Okay?
Yes.
The Christians reject Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. etc. So you have these differences that pop up between them in the acceptance of certain messengers and the rejection of certain messengers. And if this happens within one religion, right, which is really that Abrahamic religion that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all came from, then it's easy to assume and to know and to recognize that out of the 124,000 prophets and messengers, there were probably many of them that were sent to nations, and those entire nations disbelieved in them. Maybe even those nations got erased from the face of the earth. You have the story of Jonah, Yunus alayhi salam. And what happened in the story of Yunus? The messenger goes to them, he preaches to them, he goes to Nineveh, he preaches to them. They all collectively, for the most part, disbelieve in Yunus. God promises a punishment upon them. And it was only at the final hour that, because of their repentance, when they saw the storm about to arrive, when they saw the punishment about to arrive, that they basically repented. You have other nations that didn't repent, like Sodom and Gomorrah. And so if it wasn't for the Bible preserving the legacy and the story and the identity and the name of Lot, who was a messenger to Sodom and Gomorrah, nobody would have survived, right, in order to tell the tale that there was a messenger that came to us whose name was Lot. Because essentially when Lot escaped out of Sodom and Gomorrah, he escaped only with his wife and his 2 daughters, and his wife even disbelieves at the final hour. And so there really was not a single believer outside of the family of Lot that believed in the message of Lot. So the inability of the messenger to convince his people that he is a legitimate prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the eventual destruction of the nation or the rejection of the nation of that particular prophet and messenger would have resulted in history forgetting the name of that particular prophet or messenger that was sent forward to the nation.
Yes, that's clear.
Another reason why there's this big difference between 124,000 and 100, why people would have forgotten the names of the prophets and the messengers, is really due to the word prophet or the word messenger, okay, itself. You find this interesting theme taking place within the Abrahamic traditions, where there are certain individuals that exist as holy characters, as divinely appointed individuals by God in the religion of Judaism, for example, that are not recognized as prophets, but are recognized as something else. They hold a different office or a different title. But the religion of Islam or the religion of Christianity comes along and corrects and states, no, this was a prophet or a messenger, even though he had a different title. So, for example, Joshua, the son of Nun, is considered to be a judge in Judaism. In Islam, he's considered to be a prophet. You have David and Solomon. David's considered to be a divinely appointed king, right?
Yes.
In Judaism. In Islam, he's considered to be a prophet.
Exactly.
And so you have within Judaism different titles that are given to these divinely appointed individuals. Some are called prophets, and these prophets often have prophecies that they give to the people, like Jeremiah. Jeremiah was considered to be one of the major prophets, one of the greatest prophets. Isaiah, the same thing. Zechariah, Malachi, Obadiah, right? Zephaniah. All of these guys were recognized as prophets. Moses was recognized as one of the greatest, if not the greatest prophet in all of Judaism. Aaron, who lived with Moses, was not really considered to be a prophet in Judaism so much. He was considered to be a priest, and a divinely appointed priest at that. Islam comes and it takes the category of individuals who were appointed by God as priests, the divinely appointed kings, so the priests that are like Aaron, the divinely appointed kings that are like David and Solomon, the judges that were appointed by God like Joshua and Gideon and others, and they call all of them prophets, in addition to those who are recognized explicitly as prophets within the religion of Judaism. And this is important. Why? Because if this confusion occurs within the Abrahamic religions, right, which is really, it all stems from one source at the end of the day, then it is very probable and likely that there were other prophets and messengers that were sent to other nations that would have had titles other than judges or kings or priests or prophets, and would have still been a prophet. So the Quran and the religion of Islam is essentially saying what? Is saying that when we say that there were 124,000 prophets that were sent to mankind, we are saying that the term prophet refers to any individual who is divinely inspired by God or has some sort of communication or message that he carries from the divine.
Yes.
And by that definition, by a prophet being anyone who is divinely inspired by God, and not just a person who prophesied, the judges, the priests, the kings that were appointed by God, they are also all prophets. But in cultures that are outside of the Judaic, Christian, Islamic religions, they wouldn't have necessarily called the individuals in their societies prophets. And there are lots of cultures around the world and ancient languages that did not even have a term or a word in their language or in their vocabulary that was the equivalent to the term prophet. And so they would have had a different term. And so if we had prophets that were sent to other nations, other peoples, to speak to them in their language, because the Quran says that we have not sent a messenger except that he speaks to the people in their language, all right? In their tongue. And in their tongue actually could refer to their language, and it also could refer to their culture, right? Then they might have had a different name given to them. And one such name that might have been given to somebody who was divinely inspired would have been a philosopher, for example.
Yes.
And when we open up the door to that notion that we must look for these individuals who are prophets and messengers, right, under different titles than prophet or messenger, not every culture would have accepted an individual to go to them and say to them, guys, I am a prophet, I am a messenger of God, because that very idea or notion would have been foreign to the way that they wouldn't have even understood what he was saying. That this concept of God taking forward an individual and telling him, you are a prophet of mine, you are a messenger of mine, is a very Abrahamic exclusive term, right? Or idea or notion. If we were to take the divinely inspired or divinely appointed concept and place it in other cultures, it would have looked differently. And the way that the messenger who was sent to another nation would have spoken would have been differently. So, for example, you find that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he's speaking to his people, he's referring to the Judaic and Christian prophets and messengers. And that is because within his nation, within his city, amongst his people, were Arabs who were Christians and who were Jews and who were also polytheists, idol worshippers, but that were familiar with the prophets and the messengers and the religions of Judaism and Christianity. And so he comes and he confirms to the people those ideas that were what?
Familiar with them.
Familiar to them. But if there were no Jews and there were no Christians that existed in that time in Arabia when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent, for him to say to his nation, and remember, for example, Zechariah, or remember Enoch, Idris, or remember this person or that person, these references would have meant nothing to those people. And it wouldn't have been of wisdom for the Prophet or for God himself to bring down a book mentioning stories or referring to stories to a people who knew nothing about these stories. But rather, the God of the Quran would have to speak to the people in the terms that they understood. We can see this playing out in something else, for example, in this notion of demons and jinn. For the Jews, for the Christians, they had this notion of demons. Shayateen, right?
Yes.
For the Arabs, they were familiar with a different entity, and this entity had a different name, and it was called jinn. And jinn is not a term which exists in the Bible.
Yes.
But the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brings down an entire surah, and the surah is called the Surah of the Jinn. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam explains in the narrations, him and his household, that, for example, the Prophet Sulaiman, he used to control the jinn.
Yes.
In the Bible, it says what? That he would control the evil spirits, or he would control the demons, right?
Yes.
So the term is different, but the reference is to the same idea or the same concept. And that's important to realize why, because if we're looking for a messenger who is sent to Mexico, the Aztecs, or he's sent to the Persians, right? Or he's sent to the Indians, right? Or thousands of years ago, you can't look for terms such as jinn, or prophets, or messengers, or Zechariah, or John, or Jesus, because these people were so far away from those messengers who were sent to a different culture that these references would have meant nothing to them. But the absence of references that are familiar for the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims does not mean the absence of messengers having been sent or messengers existing in the history books and cultural tales and fables of these societies. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's crystal clear. SubhanAllah, yes.
Good, alhamdulillah. So now when we look for these prophets and messengers, or potential prophets and messengers in other cultures, the door becomes wide open. Because now we are looking for individuals that claimed to be divinely inspired, or that the tale about them or their own writings they stated in some way, shape, or form, regardless of the language, that they had received an inspiration from a higher power up above. And they seem to be also the wisest of their nation. They left an imprint or a mark upon their nation. They stand out and they shine out, and maybe their contributions to history remain until this very day. When we look for individuals that parallel Muhammad, right, amongst the Arabs, or Jesus amongst the Jews, or the other prophets and messengers amongst their nations, we find likenesses to them, even though they're not speaking to them necessarily the same way. We have in the Jewish traditions a confirmation of this idea, and it comes in the form of a tale which is told in the book of Jasher and in other extra-biblical sources. The tale of a prophet by the name of Balaam. Okay? Yes. Balaam, according to Jewish writings, was a prophet, but he was a non-Jewish prophet. He was a prophet that was sent to somebody else other than the Jewish people. And the narrations, the traditions, the book of Jasher places him specifically as a prophet who was sent to Cyprus. Okay?
Yes.
And that he was a wise man, and that he actually also had a lot of knowledge of the arts of magic. So he was a prophet, but he was also what they called a magician. And the narrations state that he was a prophet who was the equivalent of Moses to the non-Jewish people. So the non-Jews had one of the greatest prophets that were ever sent to them, who was at the same rank as Moses, was a prophet by the name of Balaam. But Balaam at some point ended up failing, and losing his title, and losing favor with God, and falling into the abyss. And this is confirmed in the Quran when it says that Balaam saw everything underneath the throne, but that it was ripped away from his tongue. And in the narrations, and in the story really that exists also in the Bible, that states that Balaam was, sent forward to pray against the Israelites, or pray against Moses, or, be in a confrontation against them, in the famous story that leads to Balaam basically being riding on a donkey, and the donkey seeing an angel that's blocking the path, and the rest of the story. But the idea here is that there is this messenger, the concept of messengers being sent to non-Jewish nations, right? Non-Arab, non-Semite nations, but are being confirmed as really having been sent by God.
Yes.
Another prophet or messenger that was sent forward, all right, and confirmed actually in the Bible as having been a prophet or messenger that was sent to a different nation, but was non-Jewish, was Cyrus. Cyrus is described as being God's anointed one. And he actually does the opposite of Balaam. Balaam had went forward to fight against the Israelite prophet Moses. Cyrus does the opposite, and he actually helps the Israelites return to the promised land, and he helps them to, he helps enforce the prophets and the messengers that were existing at his time. And he is confirmed to have been a true prophet, somebody who was divinely inspired. Now, Cyrus was not a Christian, was he? He was not a Jew. Tell us a little bit about Cyrus. What was he?
The religion of Cyrus is a mystery. It's almost, I searched a lot about it. We couldn't find it. At least I couldn't find a specific answer or a certain answer. Somebody said, okay, he's the anointed one of the Lord, of the Jewish Abrahamic God. He's the anointed one there. And then some say, okay, he's a Zoroastrian because he comes from Persia. And then some others say, no, he's not. He's not a Jew. No, he's not a follower of the Yahweh. He is not a follower of Ahura Mazda. Rather, in his cuneiform, he is praising the Lord of Babylon. And the Lord of Babylon is called Marduk, so he is a worshipper of Marduk. But some say, no, this is just for the political views that he did it, and the fourth one that I heard is saying that he was a follower of a Mitra. So there is no certain answer to this question. Nobody knows actually.
And I think that's an important thing to point out, because here you have also history being confused about particular individual and where their religious affiliation lies. And so it becomes easy for people to dismiss this person as a prophet or a messenger a lot of the times. But the fact of the matter is that he did come from Persia, where the religion over there was what? Zoroastrianism. Right? Yes. And you have him supporting prophets and being called in the Bible as God's anointed one, right? And so it clearly is the case where you have an individual who is a non-Jewish prophet, who is inspired by God to carry out a particular command or set of actions. And so by the definition that we stated earlier, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Ahl Bayt gave when they were talking about the 124,000 prophets and messengers, as a person who's receiving commands from above, this person would qualify and enter into the category of being somebody who was a prophet because he was inspired by God. He's carrying out divine commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have also in the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad these clues that indicate for us that there are particular characters that are known in history that count actually as prophets and messengers. So we have, for example, this tradition that states that Salman al-Farisi, he had started off and he was a member of Zoroastrianism. He ends up going on this long journey where he abandons his family because he feels like they had gone astray from the faith and that they're worshiping the fire. And so he ends up looking for the true God, and he ends up adopting Christianity. And then when he finds out that the priests are corrupt and actually the bishops and the priests in the churches, that they're stealing the money that was given to the poor, and they're stealing the money for the church and using it as a treasure for their own selves, he ends up disbelieving in Christianity and looking, following the prophecy that a particular priest had given him, that there would appear another prophet in the end time, and he ends up going and believing in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, there's narrations that state that Salman, the Prophet Muhammad says on one occasion that Salman was actually sent before Islam as a messenger to the people in the region of Persia 400 years before the religion of Islam. All right? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also there are narrations that when he was born, and other narrations that state when he was sent forward, that there is this fire that was lit. You know this tradition?
Yes, I have.
Tell us about it.
I heard that there was a fire, because in Zoroastrianism, pure fire is the direction of the prayer. So they always try to keep this fire on. And it was a very, very old and ancient fire that was on, I think, for 1,000 years it was on, and it was, the flame would have never gone out. And when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, this fire is put out. Now it's done now.
Exactly. And that was kind of understood to be a confirmation of the religion of Zoroaster, and a confirmation of the identity of Zoroaster, that Zoroaster was an actual prophet or messenger. The hadith that says that Salman was sent hundreds of years before to the Persian people seems to imply that Salman was either an incarnation of Zoroaster himself or an incarnation of one of the successors of Zoroaster that were sent to Persia. All right?
Yes.
And the idea of the flame going out at the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is kind of this idea that there was this light that was amongst the Persians, right? That is flame, this religion, this Shekinah, this spirit of God that was there, this eternal flame, and that it went out and reappeared in the form of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's an indication to the Persians, if you're looking for the successor of Zoroaster, if you're looking for your Zoroaster, well, here's your Zoroaster now in the form of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so both traditions are really confirmations of the fact that Zaradisht or Zoroaster was a true prophet or messenger that was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though the god of Zoroaster had a different name, his name was Ahura Mazda, all right? But that the message itself was the same, that he was one of those prophets and messengers who is now talking to his people in his own language, referring to God in a way that only they would understand, right? Not in a Jewish way. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word Allah is not the word that the Jewish prophets were using to describe. They were describing God as Yahweh, right? Or Elohim, etc. The term Allah comes because it is a messenger who's coming forward with a message in an Arabic language. As such, the Persian prophet would have described God in a different way, neither calling him Yahweh nor calling him Allah, but calling him a different term. In this case, he would have been calling him Ahura Mazda, right?
Exactly, yes.
You have other traditions from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that tell the story. It's the story of the Buddha, right? But with a slight perversion of the name when they're writing it. They call him Buzesef, right?
Yes.
Or they call him something which is similar to that. So, but the story is exactly the same, and it's describing the tradition of Buddha, and it claims that he is also one of the messengers. There's yet another tradition which speaks about how Amr ibn al-As had come back from Egypt. And he was speaking, and he was basically describing some of the things that he saw in Alexandria. And he had mentioned that he saw in one tradition a group of people that were sitting around in circles, and they were praising a man by the name of Aristotle, right? Yes. And he sent curses upon them. Right? And then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam reprimands Amr ibn al-As, and he tells him, don't curse this man. Verily, Aristotle was a prophet who was sent to his people, but he was not recognized as such. So he's saying that this was an unknown prophet and messenger. It was a prophet who was sent to his people. His name was Aristotle. He was divinely inspired. He had a mission, but his people did not recognize him as a prophet. They only recognized him as a philosopher. And another tradition, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam compares himself to Aristotle and says, I am the Aristotle of this nation. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have never compared himself to a non-believer. And so now you have this idea that there are people that are recognized by their nations as simply philosophers, right? Yes. Or like in the case of Aristotle. But they are divinely inspired, and they're from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are prophets. There's individuals that were recognized by their cultures as great kings, like Cyrus. He was a king, right? But he was a prophet. And there were others who were sent to their nations, and they appeared to them as a prophet, really. But the message that they carried might have been different. Like in the case of Zoroaster, the terminology was different than that which we are familiar with, but it doesn't negate that he was a prophet or a messenger. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense.
Now, having said that, and in conclusion to this episode, let's leave our viewers at this point, and we'll give them a small list of some prophets and messengers as we begin to open the door for future episodes that we're going to be recording, whereby we are going to be speaking with some of the believers that come from Asia, and we will be discussing prophets and messengers that were sent to their nations or their regions. We'll speak to believers that are in this call that come from Europe, and we'll be examining the cases of and the stories and the lives of many of the prophets and the messengers that came and were sent to Europe that were unknown to the people from the 124,000 prophets and messengers. And we'll be speaking to people from South America and from Mexico, from the descendants of the Aztecs and the peoples that lived in those regions, to discuss prophets and messengers that were sent also there that are a part of this gigantic family of 124,000 prophets and messengers. And we will also be speaking with people that come from Africa. And we are right now broadcasting to the African people on one of our satellite channels. We have 2 satellite channels right now that are broadcasting to the world. We have one that's broadcasting to the Middle East and North Africa, everywhere from Morocco all the way to as far east as Pakistan. And we have a second satellite channel that's broadcasting to Europe and also broadcasting to Africa, from Libya all the way down to South Africa. And we will be talking to people about the prophets and messengers, the unknown prophets and messengers that were sent to the African people. And of course, we won't forget about Australia and many of the other regions that people would have never expected prophets and messengers to have been sent to. Perhaps places like Antarctica, and also countries or islands or nations that have sunken into the ground or into the sea and no longer exist today on our modern maps. So let's leave them with a few of those names, and then we'll end today's episode. Imam Ahmad al-Hassan alayhi salam, he confirmed that Zoroaster was a prophet that was sent to Persia, and that also Cyrus was as well. And also a man by the name of Darius, who was a great king. He was also a prophet and messenger. We have Buddha is a prophet who was sent to his people. We have also Krishna and Arjuna, who were also sent to their people. We have Lao Tzu. We also have Confucius, and we have many others. In Europe, there was sent Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, Aesop, Alexander, and others. And inshallah, we'll end there. And hopefully that was food for thought for the people. And thank you once again for joining me on this very important conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Divine Teacher.
God bless you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.